On the morning of August 16, 1966, Captain Munir Redfa climbed into the cockpit of his MiG-21 Fishbed-E at Rashid Air Base outside Baghdad. The aircraft represented the pinnacle of Soviet aerospace engineering, a Mach 2 interceptor that Arab air forces believed invincible against anything the West could deploy. Iraqi ground crews had filled the external tanks to capacity at Redfa's request, standard procedure for extended training flights over the desert. What they did not know was that this particular sortie would never return. Within hours, their most advanced fighter would be sitting on Israeli tarmac, and the entire strategic calculus of Middle Eastern air warfare would undergo irreversible transformation. The MiG-21 had entered service with the Soviet Air Force in 1959 and rapidly proliferated across Warsaw Pact nations and Soviet client states. By mid-1966, Egypt operated 34 Fishbeds, Syria 18, and Iraq 10. These sleek delta-wing interceptors gave Arab air forces technological parity, or so they believed, with Israeli Mirage IIIs and aging Vaudour bombers. The aircraft's combat ceiling exceeded 57,000 feet. Its twin afterburning turbojet could push the airframe to Mach 2.05. Armed with a 30mm cannon and heat-seeking atoll missiles, the MiG-21 represented the cutting edge of supersonic air combat capability. Intelligence assessments from Cairo to Damascus emphasized one consistent theme: Western fighters could not match Soviet engineering. This confidence would prove catastrophically misplaced. The seeds of Operation Diamond had been planted 3 years earlier in 1963, when Mossad directors recognized that technical intelligence on frontline Soviet equipment remained fragmentary and unreliable. Photographic reconnaissance provided external dimensions and performance estimates, but the crucial variables, cockpit ergonomics, avionics architecture, handling characteristics under combat stress, remained opaque. Acquiring an intact MiG-21 became a strategic imperative. Israel faced growing fleets of these interceptors across multiple hostile borders, yet lacked comprehensive data on how to exploit their vulnerabilities. Prime Minister Levi Eshkol personally authorized Mossad's Overseas Operations Division to initiate contact with potential defectors inside Arab air forces. The breakthrough emerged from an unexpected quarter. A Jewish Iraqi named Yusuf, who had worked since childhood as a servant for a Maronite Christian family in Baghdad, maintained contact with Israeli intelligence through back channels in Tehran, where diplomatic relations still existed. Yusuf's girlfriend knew the wife of an Iraqi Air Force pilot, Munir Redfa. Born in 1934 to an Assyrian Christian family, Redfa had graduated near the top of his flight training class and demonstrated exceptional skill in both interceptor and ground attack roles. But his career had stalled. Despite outstanding performance evaluations, Redfa watched Muslim officers with inferior records receive promotions to squadron command while he remained a captain. The discrimination was systematic and deliberate. Christians could fly for Iraq, but they could not lead. Then came the orders that shattered whatever loyalty Redfa still harbored. In early 1965, Iraqi High Command directed his squadron to conduct strikes against Kurdish villages in the northern mountains. The Kurds represented an ethnic minority the Ba'athist government deemed troublesome, and air power offered an efficient suppression tool. Redfa flew 3 such missions, strafing villages with 57 rockets and cannon fire. The operations violated every principle he believed the military should embody. When he returned from the third sortie, he confided to his wife Betty that he could no longer serve a regime that ordered him to murder civilians for their ethnicity. Yusuf, learning of Redfa's crisis through social networks, passed word to his Mossad contact. The pilot might be receptive. Mossad approached the recruitment with methodical caution. Initial contact occurred through intermediaries who assessed Redfa's sincerity and psychological stability. The pilot expressed willingness to defect, but only under conditions that ensured his family's safety. Israeli handlers escalated the operation. Redfa was invited to travel to Europe under cover of personal leave, a common practice for Iraqi officers seeking entertainment unavailable in Baghdad's restrictive environment. In a Geneva hotel room, Mossad officers presented their proposal. Redfa would receive $1 million, Israeli citizenship, permanent employment, and secure housing. In exchange, he would deliver his MiG-21 intact to Hatzor Air Base in central Israel during a training flight. The risk was considerable. Detection meant execution not only for Redfa but potentially for his entire family. The pilot's primary concern was not the money or even his own survival. He demanded absolute guarantees that his wife, their 2 young children aged 3 and 5, his elderly parents, and several other relatives would be extracted from Iraq before the defection. Mossad agreed. Director Mayor Amit personally observed Redfa's next meeting through a one-way mirror, evaluating the pilot's demeanor and resolve. Amick concluded that Redfa was legitimate, a man driven by principle rather than greed, disgusted by a government that had betrayed his service. The operation received final authorization. Multiple Mossad teams deployed to Iraq under various covers to orchestrate the family's exfiltration. Betty Redfa believed she was taking her children to Paris for a summer vacation. Her husband, who had promised to explain the situation, told her nothing. The deception was necessary. Spontaneous reactions to questioning by Iraqi security officials had to appear genuine. While Betty and the children enjoyed cafes along the Seine, Mossad agents worked to spirit Redfa's parents and extended family across the border into Iran through established smuggling routes. Each phase required precise coordination. Any premature detection would compromise not only the MiG acquisition but dozens of intelligence assets cultivated over years. By late July 1966, all of Redfa's family members had reached safe locations outside Iraq. The pilot received coded confirmation. The operation could proceed. Redfa traveled to Israel in early August under elaborate cover, ostensibly visiting relatives in Lebanon. Israeli Air Force Commander Major General Mordechai Mahdi Had met him personally at a secure facility near Hatzor. The two men reviewed detailed maps and aerial photographs. Had outlined the flight path: climb to 30,000 feet after departure from Rashid, proceed northwest across Anbar province, cross the Jordanian border near Al-Mafraq, then turn southwest toward the Israeli frontier. Two IAF Mirage IIIs would meet him at the border and escort him to Hatzor. Timing was critical. Redfa needed sufficient fuel to complete the 560-mile journey, and his absence from Rashid could not exceed the plausible duration of a long-range navigation exercise. August 16th dawned clear across Iraq. Redfa filed a standard training flight plan with the tower at Rashid, listing a high-altitude navigation sortie over western desert areas. Ground crew topped off his internal and external tanks, 108 gallons in the centerline auxiliary plus full internal capacity. The MiG-21's Tumansky R-11 turbojet consumed fuel voraciously, particularly in afterburner, so extended flights required maximum load. Redfa strapped into the narrow cockpit, noting the cramped visibility and restricted rearward view that would characterize every report Israeli and American test pilots later filed. He taxied to the active runway, received clearance, and spooled the engine to full military power. The Fishbed accelerated smoothly, rotating at 180 knots. Redfa retracted the landing gear and initiated a climbing turn to the northwest. By the time Iraqi air defense radar registered that the MiG had deviated from its filed flight plan, Redfa had crossed into Jordanian airspace. Two Royal Jordanian Air Force Hawker Hunters intercepted him over the Man Plateau. The Jordanian pilots attempted radio contact, receiving no response. Redfa maintained course and altitude, displaying Iraqi markings prominently. The Hunters paralleled his flight path for several minutes, then broke off. An Iraqi aircraft flying through Jordan was not inherently suspicious given the political alignments of the era. Redfa pressed on, his navigation taking him over the Negev approach corridor. Right on schedule, two IAF Mirages appeared on his wingtips. The Israeli pilots visually confirmed the MiG's identity, then escorted Redfa to a long, straight-in approach to Hatzor. The tower cleared him to land. Redfa deployed flaps and landing gear, feeling the characteristic heavy buffeting as airspeed bled off below 200 knots. The MiG touched down hard. Delta wings offered minimal lift at low speed and rolled out to the end of the runway. Israeli ground crews, already briefed in position, surrounded the aircraft immediately. Redfa shut down the engine, popped the canopy, and climbed out. Major General Had was waiting. The two men shook hands. Behind them, technicians were already photographing every detail of the aircraft's exterior before towing it into a closed hangar. Operation Diamond had succeeded. Israel now possessed an intact, fully operational MiG-21 Fishbed-E, serial number 7. The immediate priority was evaluation. Israeli test pilot Danny Shapira conducted the initial flights, working closely with Redfa to understand Soviet operational procedures and tactical doctrines. Shapira's reports confirmed suspicions about the MiG's performance envelope. The aircraft accelerated impressively and could sustain tight instantaneous turns thanks to its delta wing planform. But several critical weaknesses emerged quickly. Engine spool-up from idle to full military power required 14 seconds, a near eternity in combat where split-second throttle response determined survival. Formation flying proved difficult because the sluggish engine response forced pilots to constantly adjust with speed brakes and rapid throttle movements that risked compressor stalls. The gunsight drifted off the bottom of the windscreen during high-G tracking, rendering accurate fire nearly impossible under maneuvering conditions. Forward visibility through the armored windscreen was restricted. Rearward visibility through the narrow canopy and tailcone was worse, creating a 50-degree blind sector directly astern, the classic attack vector. After several weeks of intensive testing, Israeli intelligence shared the aircraft with the United States. Washington's interest was acute. American pilots were already encountering MiG-21s over North Vietnam, where Soviet advisors and North Vietnamese Air Force interceptors exploited ground-controlled intercept radar to position fishbeds for ambush attacks. U.S. losses were mounting. In late 1966, the MiG was disassembled, loaded aboard a transport, and flown to Groom Lake, Nevada, the remote test facility colloquially known as Area 51. The Defense Intelligence Agency designated the evaluation program Have Donut, a reference to the MiG-21's distinctive circular nose intake. The aircraft received the cover designation YF-110 and was reassembled inside a secure hangar to avoid detection by Soviet reconnaissance satellites. Have Donut test pilots began flying the MiG against every frontline American fighter: F-4 Phantoms, F-105 Thunder Chiefs, F-104 Starfighters, F-100 Super Sabres, and F-5 Freedom Fighters. Each engagement followed rigorous protocols, offensive and defensive scenarios, high and low altitude intercepts, turning engagements, zoom climbs, and hit-and-run passes. DIA analysts compiled exhaustive reports on every aspect of the fishbed's performance. The findings validated Israeli observations and revealed additional exploitable flaws that would reshape American air combat tactics. The most critical discovery involved low-altitude speed limitations. Below 15,000 feet, the MiG-21 could not exceed Mach 0.98, approximately 685 miles per hour at sea level, without encountering severe buffeting that made controlled flight impossible. American fighters, particularly the F-4 Phantom and F-105 Thunder Chief, routinely operated at supersonic speeds below 15,000 feet. This meant U.S. pilots could dictate engagement terms by maintaining high speed at low altitude, forcing MiG pilots into prolonged subsonic maneuvering where energy management favored Western designs. The implication was profound. Below 15,000 feet, the F-4 could control the fight simply by exploiting the MiG's airspeed limitation. High-speed handling presented another exploitable weakness. Above 685 mph, the MiG-21 required exceptionally heavy control inputs to generate pitch changes. This characteristic, likely engineered to prevent overstress during high-speed dives, made recovery from ground attack passes problematic. Fighter-bomber missions demanded rapid pull-ups to clear target areas and avoid ground fire, but the fishbed's heavy pitch forces at high speed made achieving high pitch rates difficult or impossible. Pilots attempting aggressive dive bombing or strafing runs found themselves committed to extended, predictable flight paths during recovery, vulnerable windows for defensive fire or intercepting fighters. The engine's slow acceleration compounded tactical limitations. 14 seconds from idle to full military power meant MiG pilots could not rapidly adjust speed during formation maneuvers or respond to sudden threats. American jets corrected similar deficiencies in the 1950s. Soviet engineers had evidently accepted the trade-off to minimize complexity and maintenance requirements. The Tumansky R-11 also exhibited a tendency to hang up during spool-up, creating risk of compressor stall or engine overtemperature. Additionally, engaging or disengaging the afterburner produced visible puffs of unburned fuel, white contrails that pinpointed the aircraft's location to adversaries several miles away. Visibility limitations reinforced tactical vulnerabilities. Forward visibility through the armored windscreen and gunsight assembly was adequate for high-altitude interception but restrictive during low-altitude maneuvering. The protective seat flap over the pilot's head and the narrow canopy design created a 50-degree blind cone directly astern. American pilots learned to exploit this sector, positioning for stern attacks where MiG pilots had minimal ability to visually acquire threats. The small frontal cross-section that made the MiG-21 difficult to spot at long range also meant its radar return was minimal, complicating beyond visual range engagements. DIA analysts issued comprehensive tactical recommendations. Against the F-4 Phantom, American pilots were advised to maintain high speed and operate vertically. Zoom climbs and extensions exploited the Phantom's superior acceleration and energy retention. Prolonged turning engagements played to the MiG's strengths. Its delta wing allowed tight instantaneous turn radius at the cost of rapid speed bleed-off. The key was to avoid dogfighting. For F-105 Thunderchief pilots, the guidance was even more explicit: emulate MiG-21 hit-and-run tactics, approach fast, attack from the rear hemisphere, and depart at supersonic speed. Never get slow, never get drawn into sustained maneuvering. The have-done-it findings reached operational squadrons through classified briefings and tactical bulletins. Fighter pilots absorbed the data, recognizing that the MiG-21's reputation as an invincible Soviet superfighter was largely myth. Yes, the aircraft could turn tightly and climb rapidly, but it could not accelerate quickly, could not maneuver effectively at high speed, could not sustain supersonic flight at low altitude, and offered poor visibility. Exploiting these weaknesses required disciplined energy management and refusing to fight on the MiG's terms. American pilots who maintained speed and used vertical maneuvering consistently defeated MiG-21s throughout the remainder of the Vietnam War. By January 1973, when Captain Paul Howman and First Lieutenant Lawrence Coleman scored the final U.S. Air Force MiG kill of the conflict, a textbook rear hemisphere attack precisely as have-done-it analysts recommended, the cumulative kill ratio stood at 2-to-1 in favor of American fighters. For Israel, the intelligence windfall proved even more consequential. On the morning of June 5, 1967, Israeli Air Force strike packages launched Operation Focus, simultaneous attacks on Egyptian, Syrian, and Jordanian air bases designed to achieve total air superiority within hours. Israeli pilots knew exactly how Arab MiG-21s would respond to defensive scrambles. They knew the Fishbed's slow engine acceleration meant interceptors would struggle to gain altitude quickly. They knew the aircraft's limited rearward visibility created blind approach corridors. Most critically, they knew that below 15,000 feet, their Mirages could outrun any MiG-21 attempting pursuit. Egyptian Air Force commanders detected the inbound raids and ordered immediate scrambles. MiG-21 pilots sprinted to their aircraft, started engines, and began taxiing. But the Israeli strike packages had timed their approach to catch Egyptian fighters on the ground or in the vulnerable climb-out phase. Wave after wave of Mirages and Aragans swept across Egyptian bases at Fayed, Kabret, Beni Suef, and Abu Suur. Within 3 hours, Israel destroyed nearly 300 Egyptian aircraft, most of them obliterated on parking ramps before pilots could even reach their cockpits. The few MiG-21s that managed to launch found themselves outnumbered and outmaneuvered by Israeli pilots who exploited every weakness Operation Diamond had revealed. Syrian Air Force fared no better. On the evening of June 5th, Israeli fighters struck Syrian airfields at Damascus, Sakal, and Marj Ruhil. 32 MiG-21s, 23 MiG-15s and MiG-17s, and 2 Ilyushin Il-28 bombers, two-thirds of Syria's combat aviation, were destroyed within hours. Surviving Syrian aircraft retreated to distant bases near the Iraqi border and played no further role in the war. Iraqi MiG-21s, flying from the very bases where Munir Redfa had once been stationed, attempted to reinforce Syrian defenses but were intercepted by Israeli Mirages operating with complete tactical awareness of the Fishbed's limitations. The air war was effectively decided before ground forces made significant contact. The knowledge Israel and the United States extracted from Serial Number 7 reverberated across Cold War military planning. NATO Air Force's revised intercept procedures and combat training syllabi. Fighter Weapons School curricula incorporated have-done-it findings into every phase of instruction. The U.S. Navy, frustrated that highly classified DIA reports were not reaching fleet squadrons quickly enough, established the Fighter Weapons School at Naval Air Station Miramar, the program that became known as TOPGUN to disseminate advanced tactics directly to operational pilots. The have-done-it insights formed foundational elements of the TOPGUN curriculum. Soviet engineers eventually learned that the MiG-21 had been compromised, though the full extent of Western knowledge remained ambiguous. Subsequent variants incorporated incremental improvements. Better engines with faster spool-up times, upgraded avionics, improved gun sights, but the fundamental aerodynamic and design trade-offs could not be reversed without designing an entirely new airframe. The MiG-21 remained in widespread service across Warsaw Pact and client-state air forces for decades, a testament to its ruggedness and ease of maintenance. But it was never again regarded as invincible. Munir Redfa settled in Israel under an assumed identity. The Israeli government honored every commitment made during recruitment. He received his $1 million payment, citizenship, and employment as a technical consultant to the Israeli Air Force. His family reunited safely, living comfortably in a secure location away from potential Iraqi reprisals. Redfa never publicly discussed the details of Operation Diamond during his lifetime. He died in 1998, his role in one of history's most consequential intelligence operations remaining largely classified for decades. Iraqi authorities conducted exhaustive investigations into the defection. Initial suspicions fell on security lapses and potential accomplices within Rashid Air Base ground crews, but interrogators gradually pieced together the Mossad operation's scope. They concluded that Redfa had been fourth on a target list. If he had refused, Israeli intelligence would have continued down the roster, blackmailing or assassinating pilots until one agreed to defect. This interpretation, whether accurate or convenient, allowed Iraqi Air Force leadership to avoid punishing Redfa's former colleagues and superiors. The defection was reclassified as an inevitable outcome of systematic Mossad penetration rather than indicative of internal disloyalty. The strategic implications extended far beyond the immediate tactical advantages Operation Diamond conferred. The operation demonstrated that even the most secure Soviet military technology could be acquired through patient intelligence work and psychological leverage. It validated Western investment in human intelligence networks operating inside hostile nations. Most significantly, it shattered the perception of Soviet technological invincibility that Arab governments and military planners had cultivated throughout the early 1960s. The MiG-21 was not an unbeatable superfighter. It was an aircraft with specific strengths and critical vulnerabilities, and those vulnerabilities were now comprehensively documented in classified Western files. The precedent established by Operation Diamond encouraged similar efforts. In subsequent years, the United States acquired additional Soviet aircraft through various channels, defections, covert purchases, seizures during conflicts. These aircraft underwent evaluation under programs with names like Have Drill, Have Ferry, and Constant Peg. Each program added incremental knowledge, refining Western understanding of Soviet design philosophies and tactical doctrines. The intelligence advantages compounded over time, contributing to the overwhelming air superiority Western forces demonstrated during the 1991 Gulf War when American fighters faced Iraqi MiG-29s and Su-25s flown by pilots who had never trained against adversaries fully aware of their aircraft's limitations. Historians and intelligence analysts regard Operation Diamond as a watershed achievement in Cold War espionage. The operation required multi-year planning, coordination across multiple agencies and nations, sophisticated psychological operations, and flawless operational security. It extracted a high-value strategic asset from a hostile nation without resorting to military force, and it generated intelligence dividends that shaped air combat tactics and training for a generation. Classified debriefings conducted in the 1990s, after Soviet archives became partially accessible, confirmed that Moscow never fully understood how comprehensively the MiG-21 had been compromised. Soviet Air Force leadership believed Western pilots had acquired limited knowledge through brief encounters or downed aircraft fragments. They did not realize that their premier interceptor had been tested, measured, and dissected in exhaustive detail at a secret American base in the Nevada desert. The aircraft itself eventually found a place in aviation history. After Havdonit concluded, the MiG-21 was retained at Groom Lake for additional testing under follow-on programs. It flew against successive generations of American fighters, providing baseline data for comparative performance assessments. In the 1980s, as Soviet aviation technology advanced and the Fishbed became obsolescent, the aircraft was retired from active testing. Its ultimate disposition remains classified, though aviation historians speculate it resides in a secure storage facility alongside other foreign aircraft acquired during the Cold War. For Munir Redfa, the pilot who made it all possible, the legacy is more ambiguous. He betrayed the nation he had sworn to serve, yet he did so in response to orders that violated his deepest moral convictions. He accepted $1 million payment, yet he demanded guarantees for his family's safety before agreeing to defect. He handed the West a decisive intelligence advantage, yet he was not motivated by ideology or geopolitics. He was an Assyrian Christian whose government ordered him to massacre Kurds and then denied him promotion because of his ethnicity. History offers no simple judgment on such choices. What is beyond dispute is the operational outcome. On August 16, 1966, when Redfa's MiG-21 touched down at Hatzor Air Base, the strategic balance of air power in the Middle East and Southeast Asia shifted irreversibly in favor of the West.